Good evening, everybody. We are going to be studying chapter 2 of Masechtas Megillah. And in Mishnah Aleph, we're going to give the basic interpretation or the general interpretation, and we're also going to offer a famous idea that was delivered by the Baal Shem Tov. Tonight's class is dedicated in loving memory of my dear mother, Rivka Bas Harav Reb Shloimeh. May her neshama have an aliyah in merit of this study.
Amen. Zichra livracha.
Thank you. So, Hakeiras HaMegillah Lemafreya. If a person reads the Megillah backwards doesn't mean literally backwards, but it means out of sequence. So, for example, they read a verse and then they skip a verse and read the next verse and then go back and read that verse. Or they read chapter 2 before chapter 1. Lo yatsa, says the Mishnah, they do not fulfill their obligation. Baal Shem Tov has a wonderful idea, and he says, Hakeiras HaMegillah Lemafreya, a person who reads the Megillah Lemafreya backwards, like it was some time ago, the miracles and the story and the energy of the story is a story of yesteryear, Lo yatsa. In other words, a person has to read the Megillah and as if it's happening now.
Wow.
As if these miracles are happening now. As if this story is his or her story. That's how you read the Megillah. That's how you live with the Megillah. If you read it as an ancient story that we're just commemorating, Lo yatsa. It's a beautiful word from the Baal Shem Tov. Kra al peh. What happens if a person recites it by heart? He's got a fantastic memory, and he reads the Megillah by heart. Let's not use such an extreme example. Let's say he only reads a verse by heart, or a couple of verses by heart. Kra targum. Or if the person reads it in a translation, but an Aramaic translation, but he doesn't understand what he wants. B'chol lashon, in any lashon, in any language. Lo yatsa, which means if he reads it in another language, but he doesn't understand what he's reading. So if we read the Megillah in Chinese, and we don't speak Mandarin, so lo yatsa, you don't fulfill your obligation. Aval keirim oisel la'azais belaz, lezeazais belaz. But if you read it in a foreign language, for a foreign language, so for example, you read it in English for Americans, so then yatsa ba'aleis sheshemas ashuris, or alternatively, a person who hears it in Hebrew, he doesn't understand the original Lashon Kodesh that it was written in. Yatsa, but it's written properly. So Yatsa. So there's two different things here.
So if
First,
you read it for foreigners in their foreign language, they are Yatsa, but you're not.
Time out. You're reading some of the commentary here.
No. I was just assuming.
Yeah, let me explain here. First of all, it should be noted that in practice this doesn't really work. It doesn't mean that you open up the back of the Art Scroll Chumash and you go to Megillah Esther and you read it there that you're Yaitza. That's not what it means. You would have to write it
in English
on parchment with kosher ink, and the translation would have to be literal and word for word. Literal. And the sages of old had a very difficult time with this back in yesteryear, let alone today. So it's not really the practical way of reading the Megillah.
Wow.
So again, let's understand it inside of a belaz. But if you read it for foreigners in their language, it can't just be read in their language. You have to be written in a Megillah in their language properly by a scribe. So that's somewhat difficult.
And it wouldn't make any sense. The translation wouldn't make sense if you.
Anyway, it's not a practical halacha.
But if a person that's not is a foreigner, hears it in Hebrew in the proper language, he's
then
Yatsa.
they're Yetzer. Yes, correct. So anybody who hears it in the original properly, even if they don't understand what's going on, they fulfill their obligation. What's the reason? Because we presume, or assume, I should say, that if you don't understand what you're hearing, you're going to ask questions, and the asking the questions will be mefarsim the nisa, will be, what's the point of reading the Megillah? Persamay nisa, in order to spread out the awareness of the special miracles that took place. So when you start asking questions, so that actually enhances, just like in the Haggadah, when you ask questions and you talk about it and you debate it, so this enhances the experience. The same thing is with a person who doesn't understand but asks questions to learn and find out. Mishnah Beis. Kra Serugin. If a person read it in a non-continuous manner. So you read a few verses, you stop, you look up some Mefarshim in the middle, or you stop altogether, or you heard a Perek, and then you had to run. So you go out, and then you go to another Megillah reading, and you hear from the second Perek, and then you go stop, and you hear the third and the fourth, and then so on and so forth. Umisnamnim. And a person who is falling asleep, he's half asleep, he's half awake, half asleep, half awake. So such a person who hears the Megillah in such a manner, Yotza, they fulfill their obligation. So even if a person's dozing off, he had a long day, and he fasted, it was Tainus Esther, and he's tired, he's not feeling well, that's enough.
Wow.
Yotza, he fulfills his obligation. What happens if you have a person who's writing a Megillah? He's a quick writer. It usually takes a long time to write a Megillah. But he's writing a Megillah. And as he's writing a Megillah, he reads from another Megillah, because you have to copy it from one to the next. That's how we write Sifrei Kodesh. You look at one and then you copy.
You can't use a chumash to dictate?
So in this case, he's using you could use a chumash, but he's using another Megillah. So he's reading and then he's writing. He's reading and he's writing. So that's Koisfa. Dersha, a person's giving a drasha. He's teaching students or anybody else about the Haggadahs. About the Megillah. So he reads a verse and then he gives a whole explanation. And then he reads another verse and he gives a whole other explanation. Umagia, or a person's checking a Megillah. He has a Megillah. He's a sofer. And he wants to check that it's accurate. So he's checking the Megillah. He's looking through the Megillah to check that it's correct, or that there's no letters that are rubbed or faded or whatever it is. Says the Mishnah, Im kivin liboy, if he pays attention, right? He wants to fulfill his obligation of reading and hearing the Megillah. Through this process, Yatsi fulfills his obligation.
Even if he finds something to correct?
But the point is he's reading the Megillah and he's paying attention. He wants to fulfill his obligation. So in such a case, he fulfills his obligation for reading the Megillah B'Ivim Lav. But if he was writing it, but he wasn't paying attention to the story, and he wasn't intending to fulfill his obligation, or if he was expounding upon it, but he didn't think that he's fulfilling his obligation, at this point he wasn't keeping track. So in such a case, it would not be Yaitza. If a person writes the Megillah with Sam, what exactly Sam is? Either it's yellow arsenic, according to Rashi, or Rambam and Rav say it's ink derived from a grass root, uvesikra, or with vermilion. Rashi translates this to a red dye. Rav says it's a red chalk. Uvakemes, or with gum. This is an Arabic gum that would manufacture ink.
Acacia.
It's like a tree sap.
Or according to the Rambam, a yellow earth. Uve kan kintain, or with ferrous sulfate. Be very honest, I don't know what all these things are precisely, but they're all not proper ink. That's what's going to be the end of it. Ala niyar, or if it was written on paper as opposed to parchment, cloth, yeah. Lo yatsa, does not fulfill his obligation. In other words, you need a real Megillah written with proper ink, with proper dio, which is proper ink, and proper parchment. Ad shetehei ksuvas ashuris, it has to be written in Assyrian script, just like a Torah scroll or tefillin or mezuzah, ala sefer, on proper parchment, uvidyoi, and with proper ink, says the Mishnah. So, in other words, bottom line, you can't read it from a chumash. It has to be written properly, just like the other Kisvei Kodesh. Ben Ir, shahalach lechrach, uven krach shahalach leir. Actually, before we get on to to this Mishnah, we should talk about a few ideas here. Earlier, in last week's Perek Aleph, we spoke about when the Megillah is read. When is the Megillah read? So, for generally speaking, the Megillah is read on the 14th day of Adar. But that is only for unwalled cities. For walled cities, we read it on the 15th, which is known as Shushan Purim. So now, this following Mishnah, and the following first part of the Mishnah, is going to discuss what happens if you have a person who lives in, practically speaking, he lives in, let's say, Tel Aviv, and he's traveling to Yerushalayim. Or if he lives in Yerushalayim and he's traveling to Tel Aviv on one of these 2 days of Purim. So when does this person hear the Megillah? So now, there's a few points that we should know. Number one, wherever you go for that day, if you're going to be there for that day, that's where you live for that day. So a person who lives in Kfar Chabad, for example, which is not a walled city, and is planning on traveling to Yerushalayim for Shushan Purim, and he's going to go there a day early so now it's like he lives in Yerushalayim. He can even be a tourist from anywhere in the world. So the first point is, wherever you're going to be for that day, that's where you live, quote unquote. Another point, there's 2 Megillah readings on Purim. There's at the night, and then there's during the day. So the daytime reading is the one that's more important in this regard. It's more important altogether. But that's a separate discussion. Third of all, a person's intentions is also important. Where do you intend to be? If you leave Kfar Chabad on the 14th and you intend not to remain on the whole day of the 14th in an unwalled city, but you intend to go to Yerushalayim and stay there, that intention is of consequence. So now let's learn the Mishnah. There's one other point I should mention also, is that it's not just about going from walled cities and unwalled cities. Earlier in last week's study, Perek Aleph, we also discussed another idea, and that is when people lived in the krachim, in the villages, so they would have different days that they would read the Megillah for. They would read the Megillah on different days. They would move back to the Yom HaKnisa, the day that they would go into market day. So I don't want to go into the whole details, but the point is that different people in different places read the Megillah at different times. So now the question that the first part of the Mishnah is going to address is, if you're going to be in 2 different places over these days, where do you actually fulfill your obligation by reading and hearing the Megillah? Says the Mishnah, Ben Ir Shalach Lekrach, a person who's from this big city, but he goes to the village. Uven Krach Shalach Leir, or vice versa, a person who's from the village but will be spending Purim in the city. If he's going to be going back to his place of residency, if his intention is to go back to where he actually lives, even though he traveled away from that place, he reads together with the place that he lives. But if he's not planning on going back to his original place where he lives, then he reads like the town or the place, the city that he is in at that time. So again, intention is of consequence. You following? So now, practically speaking, if you're in Kfar Chabad and you're going for a day trip and you want to celebrate Shushan Purim, you got to leave on the 14th with the intention of going to Yerushalayim and being there and staying there and not going back to the other place for Shushan Purim. In such a case, you leave, you go there, you go to Yerushalayim, and you wait till the next day to read the Megillah with the other people. Or vice versa. If you're in Yerushalayim and you're leaving Yerushalayim. So again, your intention here is of consequence.
Well, if you were in Yerushalayim and you left, you would have to leave on the 13th to get there on the 14th because they read it on the 14th. If you left on the 14th, you already missed it.
Right? No, but if you're if you're from Yerushalayim and you go for the 14th to anywhere else, okay, but you're planning on going back to Yerushalayim for the 15th, then you don't celebrate with the people you're with. Let's use Kfar Chabad. So you're in Yerushalayim, you live in Yerushalayim, you decide to leave Yerushalayim on the 14th and go to Kfar Chabad, but you're planning on going back on the 15th.
You can't Yaitza on.
You're not gonna celebrate and hear the Megillah with the people in Kfar Chabad. Rather, you're gonna go back to Yerushalayim and celebrate there. Now, another question. From which part of the Megillah do you need to learn and need to read and hear in order to fulfill your obligation? So now, what is the discussion based on? It says in Megillah Esther, it says, "Atichteiv Esther u'Mordechai es kol teikiv." Esther and Mordechai wrote down in the Megillah, in the story, in the book of Esther, what did they write down? Es kol teikiv, all the acts of power, all the power plays in English. All the power plays were written in, obviously there were more details than are written in the Megillah. So what's written in the Megillah? All the power plays. So that's what it says. They wrote down all the power plays, all the important details. So now, the question is what are all the important details? Which details are the power plays? Which details are the most important here? So now, we have a few different sages saying different things. Rabbi Meir says Kula, the entire Megillah, which is the halacha, by the way. Every part of the Megillah is important. Everything is important. Everything is a power play. Everything is interconnected. If you missed part of it, you didn't get the whole story. That's Rabbi Meir. He says in order to fulfill your obligation, Kula, everything. Rabbi Yehuda says, Me'ish Yehudi. Rabbi Yehuda, he maintains that Kol HaTeikif, all the power plays are referring to the power plays of who? None other than Mordechai Yehudi. So in order to fulfill your obligation, you have to hear all the power plays of whom? Mordechai. When does Mordechai introduced in the Megillah? Only in the 2nd chapter, 5th verse. So you could skip, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you could skip the 1st chapter and still fulfill your obligation. He's not recommending it. He's just saying what you would fulfill your obligation.
You can't fall asleep.
Sleep, that's a whole other story. Yep. Now, Rabbi Yesi says, from, you can even start later. Perek Gimel, Pasuk Aleph, because who's introduced there? Haman Harasha. The power plays that we're talking about, are about Haman. So that's what he maintains. So according to Rabbi Yesi, you could skip until the 3rd Perek. Now, Rabbi Meir, who said Kula, what does he mean? He means all the details. And he also, it's interesting because all the details of whom? Achashverosh. It's interesting from an esoteric perspective, Achashverosh is a reference to God in the Megillah. So, according to Rabbi Meir, it says, Vayihi b'mei Achashverosh. In which pasuk is that? The first. So, according to Rabbi Meir, you have to hear the whole thing. According to Rabbi Yehuda, only from the 2nd Perek, 5th verse. According to Rabbi Yesi, even from the 3rd Perek is okay. But, of course, the halacha again is according to Rabbi Meir, you have to hear the whole thing. Fourth Mishnah, Mishnah 4. Hakol kshedim likrisas Megillah. Everyone can read the Megillah and fulfill their obligation for other people. Chutz, except Mecherish. Here we're talking about obviously not a deaf mute. Usually when we say a cherish is a deaf mute, but it can't mean a deaf mute here. Why not? Because if he's mute, he can't be reading it. There we go. This is kind of like, what color was George Washington's white horse? You're right, white. Yes, that's correct. Very good, Mordechai. So, if he's deaf mute, he can't be reading it. So, out loud. So the point is here, even if he's just deaf, so now, Rabbi Yehuda says, everyone's allowed to read the Megillah for other people, except for a cherish, a deaf person. Now, it should be noted that it's not so simple. There's a machlokes. According to Rabbi Yossi maintained, there's a machlokes. But according to this Tana, I don't want to get into too many details, but it's a possibility that according to Rabbi Yehuda, he would be allowed to read the Megillah. It's a little complicated, as I said, but right now we're reading this Mishnah. According to this Mishnah, if a cherish reads the Megillah for somebody else, a deaf person reads it for somebody else, they're not fulfilling their obligation. Shaita, an imbecile, person who's a shaita, the katan, or a minor, cannot read the Megillah for somebody else, because all of these people are not really obligated to hear the Megillah themselves. And if they're not obligated to hear the Megillah themselves, then how could they fulfill the obligation? If they're not obligated, they cannot fulfill the obligation for others. Rabbi Yehuda machshir b'katan. Rabbi Yehuda says that a katan who knows how to read the Megillah properly and understands, he's a bardas, he's mechuyev to read the Megillah, and so he could fulfill the obligation for other people. The halacha is not in accordance with Rabbi Yehuda, and so therefore you have to hear the Megillah from an adult. As to whether a woman could read the Megillah for another man, so for a woman to read it for herself or for other women, it's absolutely certain that a woman could read for other women. The question is as to whether a woman can read for a man. That's a loaded question, which we're not going to answer here right now. There is definitely a dispute on this. And even if in theory it could be done, it's not necessarily should be done. But that's again a different discussion. In Megillah, you cannot read the Megillah.
No,
you can't read the Megillah. So let's jump to the end of the Mishnah, and so it'll be a little bit easier. Ad shetoni tzachama. Till the sun rises. That's what's going to be the end. So I'm just jumping at the end because it's just going to be a little bit easier to study here. So, Megillah, you can read the Megillah for the daytime, which again, as we said before, is the more important one. Reading until the sun rises. And you cannot perform a bris milah until the sun rises. Bris milah has to be by day, on the 8th day preferably. But it has to be during the day, not during the night. So what does this mean? What this means is that until sunrise, you can't perform a bris milah. And you cannot immerse in the mikvah. What does this mean? You can't immerse in the mikvah. A person who needs to immerse on a certain day, whether it's a zav or a zava or a nida or a person who a mitzayra, whatever it might be, any person who needs to immerse in a mikvah during the day cannot immerse until the sun rises. Similarly, a woman who is a zava. What is a zava? I'll explain very briefly. There's lots and lots of details here, so we're not going to get in too deeply. But there's when a woman expels blood from her uterus. So it could either be menstruation, or it could be not in a time of menstruation. If it's in menstruation time, so that's nida. There's another time, if it's not during those times, it's called zava. Now, such a woman, according to biblical law, not as practiced today, and today it's a whole different ballgame, but a woman who's a zava, she sees a flow, she has a flow, not in the days that she would, not in the days of menstruation. So what would happen is if it just happens in one day, so then she the next day, the following day, she can go to the mikveh in the morning. She watches the whole day. She watches the whole day to see if there's no more flow. After she checks herself and there's no more flow, that night already she is no longer in the zava status and she can resume relations with her husband. So now she has to watch if this happens on 1 day or 2 days. So then she watches either the second day or the third day. If there's no more flow, so then after having gone to the mikveh in the morning, that night she would be permitted to her husband. Now, this is called a zav. This is a shemeres yom keneged yom. So when could she go to the mikveh? She can't go on the day of the flow. She has to go on the next day. When does the next day start? When the sun rises. So a woman who's watching 1 day because of the day before she had a flow, and again this is referring to zava. So in such a case, she cannot immerse until sun rises. Now sun rises means that we actually see a little bit of the sun over the horizon. But in all of these cases, if the person read the Megillah, or if they performed the bris milah, or if they immersed, or if the women immersed on the day after this zava flow, if she did it, misha'ala amud hashachar, when we start seeing rays that are coming over the horizon, which is approximately 12 minutes, approximately, because it depends how long the hour is. There's a concept of halachic hours. Hours in Jewish law are not exactly 60 minutes. Sometimes they're 60, sometimes they're more. But so in any case, that's why I say approximately 12 minutes, a fifth of an hour. Earlier than this, you already can see the rays coming over the horizon, not the sun itself. But that's a difficult time that's a difficult thing to ascertain exactly. And so therefore, in order to be safe, we wait until we see an actual ray of the sun, Amud HaShachar, in order to fulfill all of these obligations. But if a person did it within those 12 minutes approximately, but it was after Zorcha Hashemesh, we already have some of the rays. In all of these cases, kosher, it would nevertheless be valid. Well, again, this is not the preferable way of doing things. Now, Kol Hayom, the entire day, all day, kosher l'kriyas Megillah, all day is acceptable for reading the Megillah. So from the morning till the night. L'kriyas Hallel, and on days that we have to read Hallel, so you can read Hallel the entire day. L'skiyas Shofar, hearing the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. V'lenetilas lulav, and for waving the Arba Minim on Sukkot. V'letfilas hamusafim, for reciting the Musaf prayers all day. One can do this. V'la musafim, not to mention the actual musafim, not the prayers of Musaf, but the actual Musaf offerings, the sacrifices, are kosher all day. V'levidi aparim, as well as the confession of the bulls. What is this referring to? So, under certain circumstances, a Kohen Gadol or the Sanhedrin who err in a halachic decision, so they have a different law than everybody else, and they bring a special bull offering. So when they bring this bull offering, they have to confess their sin. So the entire day is acceptable for this process. L'vidia Meiser, also as we describe in the Torah, in Dvarim, in Parshas Kisavai, I believe it is. So on the last day of Pesach, in the 4th and the 7th year of the Shemitah cycle years, so you do Vidya Meisters, you say, I got rid of all my Kodesh, and I gave to the Levi, and the Ger, and the Almana, and I gave my Sarishan and Sheni, and I didn't mix it up the order, and so on and so forth. So this is called Vidya Meisters. You are testifying. It's more of a testimony than an admission, but it's called the admission that I did everything I was supposed to.
It's confessing.
Confessing I did everything. Not confessing I did something wrong, I'm confessing I did something right. In any case, this is called Vidya Meiser. Well, Vidya Yom Kippurim, also on Yom Kippur, it's a mitzvah to confess your sins. You have to confess your sins. So when is kosher for Vidya? The whole day of Yom Kippur. L'smicha, when you're bringing an offering and you put your hands on top of the head of the animal. L'shchita, for slaughtering an animal, that's going to be used as a sacrifice. L'snufa, for the waving of the sacrificial parts. L'hagasha, for bringing close. L'kmitza, for the bringing close the offering towards the mizbeach, is a service. L'kmitza, the fistful that one takes from a mincha offering. Ulahaktara, and there's somebody getting it. Ulahaktara, and for the actual putting all of this on the altar. Limalika. Malika is a special way that the Kohanim would slaughter the birds with their fingernails. Ula Kabbalah, and the receiving of the blood of a sacrifice. Ula Azoya, and the spritzing of the blood of the sacrifice. Ula Ashkoya Soita, or offering drink to a sota, a woman in the sota ceremony. In brief, a husband suspects his wife of infidelity and he warns her not to be secluded with another man. After this warning, she goes and she secludes herself with that very man. So there's an elaborate ceremony spoken about in the Torah in Parshas Nasai. She's called the Sota, and she's given water, special waters to drink that test her fidelity. Now, we give her to drink. This has to be done during the daytime. If a person is killed and we don't know who the murderer is, and he's between two cities, so we measure the distance, and the elders come out and they decapitate a young calf, a young heifer. And that's a process known as Eglo Arufa. That's also discussed in Pasha Shoftim, in Devarim. And for the elaborate purification process for a Mitzorah has to be, it says, B'yom Taharas, on the day that he becomes pure, which we learn from this, that he has to be pure. There's many inferences in all of these things that let us know that all of these things have to be done during the day. So what time during the day?
In the morning. Before sun?
All days. All day. Not before sunrise, after sunrise.
After sunrise during the day.
Before sundown.
Oh, before sundown. I'm sorry, I thought you said sunrise. Before sundown, yes. So from sunrise till sundown, any time is acceptable for these practices. Kala Laila. Now we spoke about what's kosher during the day. Now let's talk about what's kosher during the night. Kala Laila kosher liktsiras ha'omer. The Omer offering was brought Mimachras HaPesach, the second day of Pesach. Now, when did they reap it? When did they harvest it? The night before, even if it was Shabbos. Even if it was Shabbos. So if the first day of Pesach is Friday and the second day is Shabbos, so the night.
That's why we count the Omer on Shabbos.
The night we count the Omer all the time.
First day is what? I'm sorry.
If the first day is Friday and then the second day is Shabbos of Pesach, so Motzei, after the first day of Yom Tif, which is Friday night, starts the second day of Pesach. That's a night at Shabbos. Even if it's Shabbos, you still harvest it. Because we got to bring the Omer on the proper time.
You said the first day was Friday, so it's Thursday then.
No, if the first day of Pesach is Friday, the Omer is brought the next day, Shabbos. So the night before that is what? If the morning of Shabbos is the next day, what's the night before that? Friday night. But anyway, that's not what the Mishnah is talking about here. I just wanted to bring you a fascinating point, that it's harvested even on Shabbos. In any case. Only this is a special rule for this. So in any case, you can't cut anything off the ground on Shabbos. Only this, because it's a special sacrifice offering in the temple. In any case, so when do you reap? When do you harvest this offering? At night. When at night? Kol halayla. The whole night is acceptable, from sundown to sunrise. So the whole night is acceptable for cutting the Omer. And for the burning of the sacrificial limbs and the fats that we put on all night is acceptable for it to burn. This is the general rule. Anything that the mitzvah is to perform during the day, kosher kol hayom, it's acceptable the whole day. Whatever is the mitzvah is to perform this mitzvah at night, kosher kol halayla, the entire night is acceptable for this mitzvah. Thank you so much for joining us here tonight. Please join us again next week, Wednesday at 8:30, as we continue with chapter 3 of chapter Megillah. Have a very good evening.